In the busy city of Portland, not state of Oregon, to life of Ethan Clark, it was marked by simplicity and constant effort. He worked as a porter at a local market and spent his nights in a small rented apartment, where the noise of the streets mixed with the sound of his thoughts about how to improve his life. Ethan was 32 years old and, despite the difficulties, he maintained an unshakable hope that better days were to come. One step at a time, he repeated to himself, as he carried heavy boxes with a friendly smile for customers. That morning, while walking to the grocery store, Ethan witnessed something that would change his life forever. A desperate woman screamed on the sidewalk, while a boy, no more than 6 years old, crossed the street without realizing that a speeding car was approaching. Time seemed to slow down, but Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran towards the boy and, in an instinctive movement, pulled him out of the car's path at the last moment. They both fell to the ground, the impact shielding the boy from danger. The woman, who turned out to be Claire Morrison, a renowned businesswoman in the city, ran to them, crying with relief and gratitude. "My God, you saved my son," she said, hugging the boy as she looked at Ethan with teary eyes. Ethan, still panting, just nodded, trying to downplay the situation. "It was instinct," he replied, as he stood up and checked to see if the boy was okay. The boy, called Lucas, didn't seem scared, but looked at Ethan with curiosity and admiration. The scene attracted the attention of passersby, who applauded Ethan's courage. Claire, visibly moved, insisted on finding out more about him. "Please let me thank you in some way. You have no idea how much this means to me," she said, holding Ethan's hand. He smiled, trying to hide his discomfort at the sudden attention. "No need to thank me, ma'am. Anyone would do the same," he replied, but Claire knew better. However, Claire's insistence was greater. After asking about his life and work, she made sure to take down his phone number. "Please look for me. I want to help in some way," she said, before being driven away by her driver. Ethan, who was not used to interactions with people of high status, became thoughtful. He wasn't sure if he should accept anything in return, but something about this woman seemed genuine, like she really wanted to repay his courage. The following days were full of reflections for Ethan. At the market, his colleagues commented on the incident, congratulating him on his heroic act. One of them, Jimmy, said, "Man, this could change your life. You saved Claire Morrison's son. This woman is practically a celebrity." Ethan laughed, trying to change the subject, but deep down he knew that this moment had the potential to bring unexpected changes. Meanwhile, Claire couldn't get Ethan out of her head. He wasn't just the man who saved his son. There was something about his humility and simplicity that intrigued her. Claire, who was used to dealing with people only interested in their fortune and status, felt that Ethan was different. Determined to do something for him, she began planning a way to show her gratitude in a meaningful way. A few days later, Ethan received a call that would change the course of his routine. It was Claire, inviting him to lunch at a fancy restaurant downtown. Reluctant but curious, Ethan accepted. At the meeting, Claire again expressed her gratitude and, surprising him, offered him an invitation to a prestigious charity event that she was organizing the following week. "I want you to be there as my honored guest," she said. Ethan hesitated, but, faced with insistence, agreed. The idea of participating in such a grand event made Ethan nervous. He did not have suitable clothes, nor the confidence necessary to circulate among the city's elite. However, he felt that perhaps this was the opportunity he had been waiting for to change the course of his life. Little did he know that the night of the event would bring revelations that would challenge everything he knew about himself. When the day of the charity event arrived, Ethan still couldn't believe he was about to participate in something so big. With Claire's help, he got an elegant outfit and some tips on how to behave on formal occasions. "Just be yourself," she said, with an encouraging smile. "People will love meeting the man who saved my son." Despite her calmness, Ethan was nervous. He had never been to such a sophisticated place, and the idea of being the center of attention made him uncomfortable. The event was held in the luxurious ballroom of a 5-star hotel, with crystal chandeliers and exuberant decor. Ethan arrived accompanied by Claire and Lucas, who held his hand as if he already considered him a friend. As he entered the hall, he felt all eyes turn to him. Some people whispered, while others smiled, curious to meet the hero of the night. Ethan tried to remain calm, but the brightness and luxury of the room was overwhelming for someone accustomed to simplicity. Claire made a point of introducing Ethan to several important figures. Local businessmen, politicians, and artists greeted him warmly, praising his courage. A tall, elegant man named Richard Hayes, known for being one of the biggest investors in the region, said, "You are an example of bravery. This world needs more people like you." Ethan, not knowing how to respond, just thanked her with a shy smile. Every interaction felt surreal, like he was in a completely different world than yours. As the night progressed, Ethan began to feel more comfortable, especially thanks to the constant presence of Lucas, who wouldn't let go of his hand and introduced him to everyone as my hero. Claire, watching the interaction between the two, felt even more grateful for having met Ethan. "You are not just a hero to my son, Ethan. You are an inspiration to everyone here," she said, during a toast in her honor. The entire room applauded, leaving Ethan embarrassed, but also emotional. However, the night took an unexpected turn. During dinner, while Ethan was talking to some guests, an older man with a serious expression entered the room. He looked out of place, but his presence immediately caught Ethan's attention. The man, called James Cole, was a retired lawyer who had spent decades working on complex inheritance and corporate fraud cases. He stopped dead in his tracks as he looked at Ethan, his expression changing from curiosity to utter shock. Ethan noticed James's gaze and felt uncomfortable. "Is something wrong?" he asked, trying to understand the reason for the sudden interest. James, without answering, slowly approached and said, "I know you. No, it can't be a coincidence." Ethan, confused, responded, "Sir, I think you're confusing me with someone else," but James shook his head, still shocked. "No, I remember. You are a living portrait of someone I knew many years ago." The revelation left Ethan intrigued, but before he could ask further, an unexpected accident happened. While walking through the room, Ethan slipped on a small wine spill that no one had noticed. He fell hard, hitting his head on the floor. The sound of the fall made the entire hall silent, and Claire ran towards him. "Ethan, someone call an ambulance," she cried, as she carefully held his head. As paramedics arrived and took Ethan to the hospital, James Cole stood still stunned by what had just happened. He knew he needed to find out more about this man, because if his suspicions were correct, Ethan wasn't just an accidental hero. He was someone who was somehow connected to one of the biggest secrets James had kept in his career. After the accident, Ethan was rushed to the nearest hospital. Along the way, paramedics monitored his breathing and checked his vital signs. Although the fall caused a head injury, he was still conscious but visibly disoriented. Claire, next to him in the ambulance, held his hand tightly. "You're going to be okay, Ethan. I promise I won't leave your side," she said, her voice thick with worry. To Claire, Ethan had become more than a hero. He was a person she deeply admired. While Ethan was taken for emergency exams, Claire waited anxiously in the waiting room. Lucas, who had stayed with one of the security guards, was also distressed. "Mommy, will he be okay?" asked the boy, holding up a small plush he had with him. Claire hugged him and replied firmly, "Yes, dear. He is strong, and the doctors are taking care of him." But deep down, she was just as nervous as Lucas, feeling a weight in her chest that she couldn't ignore. Shortly afterwards, James Cole appeared at the hospital, visibly agitated. He asked to speak to Claire, who vaguely recognized him from the event. "I need to know more about Ethan Clark," he said, his tone urgent. Claire, surprised by the question, replied, "Why? He's just a man who saved my son. Why are you so interested in him?" James hesitated before answering. "Because he reminds me of someone I knew a long time ago. Someone who shouldn't be here anymore." James' words intrigued Claire, but she asked him to wait until Ethan was out of danger. While Ethan was being treated, doctors carried out detailed examinations to assess the extent of the injury. Fortunately, there were no serious fractures, but he would need monitoring and rest. When he was finally moved to a room, Claire was the first to visit him. "You scared me," she said with a worried smile. Ethan, still with his head bandaged, tried to minimize the situation. "I'm tougher than I look," he joked, though the pain in his voice said otherwise. Shortly afterwards, James appeared in the room, this time determined to get answers. "I don't want to be rude, but I need to ask something important," he said, looking directly at Ethan. Before Claire could intervene, Ethan waved his hand, indicating that James could continue. "Who are your parents? Where were you born?" The question left Ethan confused. He hesitantly replied, "I don't know much about my parents. I was raised in foster care in Spokane, Washington." "Why?" James was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Ethan, do you have any idea who your family might be?" he asked, his voice thick with tension. Ethan shook his head, clearly uncomfortable. "I never knew. No one came to get me, no one claimed me. It was always just me." Ethan's response seemed to confirm something for James, who took a deep breath before saying, "I think you might be part of a much bigger story than you realize." Claire, who had observed the conversation, intervened. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Cole?" James looked between her and Ethan before responding. "Years ago, I worked on a case involving a huge inheritance. A powerful family, but full of secrets. Their youngest son has mysteriously disappeared, and from what I see, Ethan could be that boy." The revelation left everyone in shock. Ethan, who had spent his entire life believing he was just one of many, now faced the possibility of being part of something extraordinary. Ethan tried to process what he had just heard. "That doesn't make sense," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "I am nobody. I spent my life carrying boxes and trying to survive. Why would someone like me be part of a powerful family?" James replied firmly, "Circumstances don't lie, Ethan. Your appearance, your age, the location where you were found. It all fits together. But we need more proof." Claire suggested that a DNA test might be the best way to confirm James' story. Ethan, although reluctant, agreed. "If it means clarifying everything, I accept it. But honestly, I don't think it's going to change anything," he said. For him, his identity was rooted in his current life, and the idea of being part of a wealthy family felt more like a burden than a gift. In the days that followed, Ethan remained in the hospital under observation. Claire took care of him personally, making sure he had everything he needed. Meanwhile, James began to delve deeper into the case of the missing heir he had mentioned. He combed through old files, inheritance records, and police reports, trying to connect the available information to Ethan's past. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that Ethan was, in fact, the boy who had disappeared decades ago. James discovered that the family involved in the case were the Harringtons, one of Portland's most influential dynasties in the 1980s. The patriarch, Walter Harrington, was a real estate mogul who built an empire, but his personal life was marked by tragedies. His wife died young, and the youngest son, Nicholas Harrington, mysteriously disappeared at the age of 5 during a family trip. Despite extensive searches, no concrete clues were found. The case was closed as a possible kidnapping, but the family never got over the loss. Meanwhile, Claire began to talk more deeply with Ethan about her life. He revealed that he grew up at St. Mary's in Spokane, and that he never knew why he was left there. "People told me that my parents loved me but couldn't take care of me," he said, with a bitter tone. Claire realized that, despite his strength, Ethan carried an emptiness that had never been filled. James brought up an old photo of Nicholas Harrington. When Claire showed it to Ethan, he was perplexed. "This kid looks like me when I was little," he said, his voice full of surprise. The resemblance was undeniable, but Ethan still had difficulty accepting that he could be part of that story. "This sounds like something out of a movie," he commented, trying to rationalize the situation. As they waited for the DNA test results, Ethan began to reflect on what he would do if he were actually a Harrington. "It doesn't change who I am," he told Claire during a conversation at the hospital. "I'm just Ethan. I always have been. I don't know if I'm ready to be someone different." Claire tried to reassure him. "You don't need to change, Ethan. No matter what the results say, you will always be the man who saved my son." James, on the other hand, was impatient. He knew that if Ethan was really Nicholas Harrington, the revelation would make a huge impact, especially since Walter Harrington was still alive, but at an advanced age and in poor health. This could be a chance to bring peace to a man who has lost everything, James told Claire. But he also knew that such a discovery could come with complications, including inheritance disputes and exposure of the story in Portland's elite social circles. When results day finally arrived, everyone was tense. James brought the envelope with the tests, handing it to Ethan. He opened it slowly, feeling the weight of all the possibilities. Upon reading the results, he was silent for a few moments before finally saying, "I am Nicholas Harrington." The revelation confirmed what James suspected, but to Ethan, it seemed more like a burden than a blessing. Claire and James tried to comfort him, but Ethan was clearly shaken. "I don't know what to do with this," he said, running his hands over his face. "I spent my whole life trying to find my place. And now you tell me that my place has always been here? That doesn't make sense." Despite his confusion, he knew he needed to face the past to understand who he really was and what the future held for him. With the confirmation that Ethan was Nicholas Harrington, the emotions in the hospital room were palpable. James Cole couldn't hide his satisfaction at having finally solved a mystery that had haunted him for decades. Claire was worried about the impact this revelation would have on Ethan as he remained silent, absorbing the news. The only certainty was that the next step would be a meeting between Ethan and his biological father, Walter Harrington. James suggested this be done quickly, given Walter's delicate health. The meeting was organized at the Harrington Mansion, an imposing estate that symbolized the height of an era of wealth and power. Ethan was nervous. Even though he agreed to meet Walter, he didn't know what to expect. "I don't know how to act. I'm not part of that world," he confessed to Claire as he adjusted the jacket she had insisted on buying for him. Claire tried to reassure him. "You don't have to act in any specific way, Ethan. Just be yourself. This is more than enough." When they arrived at the mansion, they were greeted by Margaret Harrington, Walter's older sister and the only other direct survivor of the Harrington dynasty. She was visibly excited to see Ethan, but maintained her composure. "You're like a ghost from the past," she said, as she led him to the office where Walter was waiting. Ethan felt the weight of the words, but was grateful for the warm welcome. Walter Harrington, now 86, sat in a wheelchair, wrapped in a thin blanket. His eyes, although tired, sparkled with a mixture of disbelief and hope when Ethan entered the room. For a moment, no one said anything. It was as if time had stopped. Finally, Walter broke the silence. Are you really my son?" His voice was shaky but full of emotion. Ethan hesitated before answering, but eventually said, "Yes, I think I am." Ethan's words seemed to ease a weight Walter had carried for years. He reached out a shaky hand, and Ethan took it, not sure what to feel. "I looked for you for so long," said Walter, as tears ran down his face. "When you disappeared, it was like my world fell apart. I never gave up hoping you would come back." Ethan was surprised by the intensity of Walter's emotion. He expected to be greeted with suspicion, but found a man who seemed genuinely remorseful and relieved to finally see him again. Walter began to tell his side of the story. He explained that Nicholas' disappearance was the result of a series of mistakes and oversights during a family trip to a state park. "I should have been more attentive. I should have protected you," he said, his voice breaking. Ethan listened silently, trying to process the idea that even with all the Harringtons' wealth and power, they had also suffered irreparable losses. As Ethan and Walter talked, Margaret watched closely. She looked excited, but there was something in her gaze that indicated caution. Later, when Ethan was introduced to other family members, she took him aside and said, "I hope you know what you're getting into. This name comes with responsibilities, and not everyone here will accept your presence easily." Ethan, confused, was grateful for the warning, but didn't know exactly what it meant. At the end of the meeting, Walter asked to speak to Ethan privately. "I know this is a lot for you to take in," he said, "but I want you to know that if you choose, there is a place for you here. I can't change the past, but I want to try to be part of your future." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Despite Walter's sincerity, he still felt out of place, like he was trying to fit into a puzzle that didn't feel like his own. After meeting Walter, Ethan's life changed quickly. He was invited to attend family gatherings and introduced to the Harringtons associates as the heir who had finally been found. The sudden attention was overwhelming for someone who had spent most of her life trying to avoid the spotlight. "I don't know if I can handle this," he told Claire, over dinner at his home. Claire tried to encourage him. "You are stronger than you think, Ethan. Remember who you are, no matter what this world tries to force on you." Among members of the Harrington family, reactions to Ethan's return were mixed. Some welcomed him enthusiastically, while others viewed him with suspicion, especially because of the financial implications of his reappearance. Margaret, although polite, made it clear that she expected Ethan to prove himself. "You may carry the Harrington name, but that doesn't mean you're prepared for what comes with it," she said during a private conversation. Ethan began to feel the weight of expectations he never asked for. He was invited to attend business meetings, where he was pressured to understand the family's complex investments and properties. Despite his intelligence, he felt out of place. "I'm not like them," he confided to Claire. "They talk about money and power as if it were the only goal in life. I just want to help people and live with dignity." Walter, noticing Ethan's difficulty, tried to offer support. "You don't have to be like them," he said during a meeting in the mansion's library. "You just have to be true to yourself. This name can be a blessing or a burden, depending on how you choose to carry it." Walter's words touched Ethan, but he still felt torn between the world he was introduced to and the simple life he had always known. Meanwhile, James Cole remained by Ethan's side, helping him understand what it meant to be a Harrington. He encouraged him to use his new position to make a difference. "You have a rare opportunity, Ethan. You can use your family's resources to do good," James said. Ethan began to consider the idea, but knew he would need time to find his purpose within this new context. One of the most challenging moments occurred during a formal dinner with family investors. Ethan, who had never felt comfortable in such sophisticated environments, was asked by one of those present about his plans for the company's future. He answered honestly, "I'm still learning about all of this, but I want to find a way to use these resources to benefit people who really need it." The response was met with mixed looks. Some admired his sincerity, while others considered him naive. Claire, who followed Ethan closely, saw a strength in him that few realized. "You don't have to conform to their expectations," she said, during a conversation at the end of one of the events. "You are unique because you think differently, and that's what can make a difference." Ethan was grateful for the words, but he still felt the pressure of living under the Harrington name. Over time, Ethan began to carve his own path within the family. He proposed initiatives to transform some family properties into community projects, offering education and housing for low-income families. Walter, impressed by Ethan's vision, gave his support. "Maybe this is what this family needs," he said, as he signed the first project documents. Despite the difficulties, Ethan began to find purpose within the chaos, and in doing so, he rediscovered his inner strength. As the transition to this new life continued, Ethan began to realize that his biggest challenge was not adapting to the Harringtons' world, but staying true to himself. He knew the road would be long, but with Claire, James, and even Walter by his side, he felt like he could finally face anything. After all, he had found more than a name. He had found a new chance to define who he really was. As Ethan tried to adjust to his new reality as Nicholas Harrington, the past began to resurface in unexpected ways. One afternoon, while reviewing some documents with James at the mansion, he found an old letter hidden in a drawer of a piece of furniture that belonged to Walter. The letter was addressed to Margaret Harrington and mentioned a figure called Robert Pierce, someone who seemed to be a key player in Nicholas' disappearance. "Who is Robert Pierce?" Ethan asked, intrigued. James, upon reading the name, frowned. "It's a long story," he replied hesitantly. James explained that Robert Pierce was a former employee of the Harrington family, responsible for security during the trip to the state park where Nicholas had disappeared. "He was fired shortly after the incident," James revealed. "There were rumors that he had problems with Walter, but we were never able to prove anything, Ethan felt a knot in his stomach when he heard that. If there was more to his story that remained hidden, he needed to uncover the truth. Determined to understand what really happened the day he was separated from his family, Ethan began to investigate on his own. He found an old address for Robert Pierce in one of James' files and decided to go there. Claire, upon learning of his plans, insisted on accompanying him. "You don't have to face this alone," she said, determined. Ethan nodded, feeling grateful for her presence. The address took Ethan and Claire to a small ranch outside of Portland. The property was in ruins but appeared inhabited. When they knocked on the door, an elderly, rough-looking man opened it. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Ethan, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Who are you?" asked the man, his voice hoarse. Ethan replied firmly, "My name is Ethan Clark, but it seems you know me as Nicholas Harrington." Robert's reaction was immediate. He took a step back, clearly shaken. I don't want trouble," he said, trying to close the door. Ethan caught her before he could do so. "I just want answers," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were there the day I disappeared. What happened?" Robert hesitated, but as he looked into Ethan's eyes, he realized he could no longer hide the truth. Inviting them in, Robert began to tell his version of events. He explained that during the trip to the park, a disagreement with Walter resulted in his immediate dismissal. "I was angry and I wanted revenge," he admitted, his eyes downcast. That same day, he decided to take Nicholas away from his family, intending to use him as a form of retaliation. "But it didn't take long for me to realize I couldn't do that. You were just an innocent child." Robert said that, after a few days, he left Nicholas at St. Mary's Orphanage, where he knew he would be cared for. "I was scared of facing the consequences, so I just disappeared," he said. Claire, who was next to Ethan, was horrified. "You destroyed an entire family because of a whim," she said angrily. Robert, embarrassed, just nodded. "I know, and I regret it every day since." Ethan, although shaken, felt a strange sense of relief. He finally had answers about how his life had taken this path. "I don't know if I can forgive him," he said to Robert, "but at least now I know the truth." Before they left, Robert handed Ethan an old photo of Nicholas with his mother, Charlotte. "I've kept it all this time," he said. Ethan accepted the photo, feeling that somehow this piece of the past would help him move forward. With Robert Pierce's answers in hand, Ethan returned to the Harrington mansion with a new sense of clarity. He knew that although the truth was painful, it also gave him the opportunity to decide how he wanted to shape his future. Walter, upon learning of the meeting with Robert, was shocked. "I never imagined that someone we trust could do something so cruel," he said, visibly shaken. Ethan, however, was more focused on the present. "We cannot change what happened, but we can decide what to do from now on," he replied. Ethan began to reflect on his place in the Harrington family. Although he found purpose in transforming some family properties into community projects, he knew that carrying the Harrington name came with complications. During a conversation with Claire, he said, "They expect me to become someone I'm not. I want to help, but I don't want to lose who I am in the process." Claire held his hand and said, "You can create your own path, Ethan. You don't have to follow their expectations." At the same time, Margaret continued to pressure Ethan to take on more responsibilities in the family business. "You have a role to play here, whether you like it or not," she said during a meeting. Ethan, however, began to question whether he should fully commit to the Harringtons' legacy. He decided to talk to Walter about his concerns. "I appreciate everything you're doing for me, but I need to know if this is what I really want," he told his father. Walter, in a rare moment of vulnerability, responded, "Nicholas, I just want you to be happy. No matter how you choose to live your life, I want you to know that you will always have a place here. But most of all, I want you to follow your heart." Walter's words touched Ethan deeply. For the first time, he felt he had the freedom to choose his own destiny. The following weekend, Ethan announced his decision. He would accept his place in the Harrington family, but on one condition. He would use his position to expand community projects and transform the family empire into a force for good. "I want the name Harrington to mean something more than wealth and power," he said during a family gathering. His statement was met with mixed reactions, but Walter fully supported him. "That's exactly what we need," he said, smiling. Claire, who watched Ethan's decision closely, felt immense pride. "You did it," she said, hugging him after the meeting. It turned something that could have been a burden into an opportunity for change. Ethan smiled, feeling like he was finally in control of his own story. "I'm still Ethan Clark," he said, "but now I'm also Nicholas Harrington, and I'm going to make it mean something." As Ethan prepared to take on his new role, he continued to work on community projects, using family resources to create support centers and education programs for underserved youth. He also began to build a closer relationship with Walter, taking advantage of the time they had left to create memories they never had before. Deep down, Ethan knew his journey was just beginning. Although the path was uncertain, he felt he had the tools and support needed to face it. "I always thought I was alone," he told Claire, during a walk through the mansion's garden. "But now I realize I never was. There were always people willing to help me, even when I didn't see it." For Ethan, that was the biggest lesson of all. The strength of a legacy is not just in the name, but in the connections it creates. With the decision to transform the Harringtons' legacy, Ethan dove headfirst into community projects. He started with an ambitious plan: transform one of the family's abandoned properties into a youth training center. "I want this to be a place where people can find opportunities they never had," he told Walter as they discussed the project. Walter, despite his advanced age, offered all the necessary support. "If anyone can make this work, it's you," he replied, pride visible in his voice. Ethan encountered challenges at every step of the process. Many members of the Harrington family resisted his ideas, claiming that the resources should be used to maintain traditional businesses. Margaret was one of the most critical. "You are diluting the power and prestige of our name," she said during a meeting. Ethan, however, stood his ground. "True power is in how we help others," he responded. "If the name Harrington only means wealth, then it's worthless." With the support of Walter and some family allies, Ethan managed to overcome the initial barriers. He worked directly with architects and construction teams to renovate the building. Additionally, he made a point of connecting with local organizations to ensure the center met the real needs of the community. Claire, as always, was by his side, helping to organize charity events to raise additional funds. "You are turning ideas into action," she said, as she handed out invitations to a charity gala. When the center finally opened, the ceremony brought together people from all parts of the city. Ethan gave a speech that moved everyone. For a long time, the name Harrington was synonymous with power and status. Today, we want it to symbolize opportunity and hope. This center is just the beginning of something bigger. The audience gave a standing ovation, and Walter, sitting in his wheelchair, couldn't hide his tears of pride. Despite his success, Ethan knew there was still much to do. He began expanding projects into other areas, including affordable housing and mentoring programs. With each new initiative, he felt more connected to his roots as Ethan Clark. "I don't want to forget where I came from," he told Claire during a visit to one of the projects. "It was the simplicity of that life that gave me the foundation to be who I am today." The relationship with Walter also became deeper. The two began to share stories from the past, creating a bond they never had the chance to build before. Walter confessed his regrets and expressed his admiration for the man Ethan had become. "You are everything I ever hoped my son would be," he said, holding Ethan's hand. To Ethan, those words were more valuable than any inheritance. As work at the center prospered, Ethan began planning a tribute to his biological mother, Charlotte. He wanted his memory to be celebrated in a meaningful way. With the help of Diane, the mother who raised him, he gathered information about Charlotte and decided to create a library at the center in her name. "She believed in the power of knowledge," Diane explained, "and I think she would be proud of what you're doing." The library opened months later, with a plaque dedicated to Charlotte Harrington. Ethan gave a heartfelt speech, saying, "Although I never met my birth mother, I feel like her strength and resilience lives in every decision I make. This is my tribute to her." Diane, who was next to him, held his hand proudly, while Walter, on the other side, nodded approvingly. For Ethan, that moment was a symbol of the union between his past and his present. With projects underway and family ties strengthened, Ethan began to see a future full of possibilities. However, he knew the journey was not complete. Walter, whose health continued to deteriorate, asked Ethan for one last favor. "I want you to keep this family together," he said, his voice weak. "Promise you won't let what we built fall apart." Ethan, with tears in his eyes, promised. "I will honor his legacy, but I will do it my way." Shortly afterwards, Walter passed away, leaving a void in the lives of everyone who knew him. The funeral was a solemn occasion, but also a celebration of his life and the impact he had. Ethan gave an emotional speech, saying, "My dad wasn't perfect, but he taught me that it's never too late to change. He believed in me when I was still discovering who I was. And for that, I am eternally grateful." The words touched everyone, especially Claire, who knew how much that reconciliation meant to Ethan. After the funeral, Ethan officially assumed leadership of the family business. However, he refused to follow the traditional Harrington's model. Instead, he transformed the company into an organization that balanced profit with social responsibility. He implemented policies that prioritized sustainability and positive impact on the community. The decision drew criticism from some family members, but also earned the respect of many. Claire, who had become a constant presence in Ethan's life, finally confessed her feelings for him. "You're not just a hero to Lucas," she said, with a shy smile. "You're my hero too." Ethan, emotional, responded, "You were my rock through all the difficult times. I don't know what I would do without you." The two began a relationship, building a future together based on love and partnership. As time passed, Ethan realized that his journey as Nicholas Harrington was only part of his story. He never stopped being Ethan Clark, the humble man who saved Lucas and received an unexpected opportunity. Using his position and resources, he continued to expand community projects, helping thousands of people find paths to a better life. The Harrington Mansion, once a symbol of exclusivity, has become an open space for community events and educational gatherings. Ethan was keen to preserve the essence of the place, but gave it a new purpose. "This is not just a place of memories," he said at an event. "It's a place of hope for the future." Lucas, now older, has become a sort of apprentice to Ethan. The boy deeply admired the man who had saved his life and learned so much from him. "I want to be like you when I grow up," Lucas once said. Ethan, moved, responded, "You are already braver and kinder than I ever was. You have everything to be even better." In the last years of his life, Ethan reflected on the path he had taken. He knew he had faced immense challenges, but he also recognized that each obstacle had led him to a place of meaning and purpose. "My story is not about wealth or power," he said in an interview. "It's about resilience, choices, and the ability to transform what we are given into something that benefits everyone." And so, the legacy of Ethan Clark, aka Nicholas Harrington, became a symbol of transformation and hope. His life proved that no matter where we start, there is always a chance to create something extraordinary. To those who knew him, he was more than a name. He was a living example that true greatness lies in serving others and staying true to who we truly are.